Hello. So sorry for the delay. We were waiting for the Ask Me Anything session to finish, but hopefully you can all see us now. And okay, one second. There it is. So I'm so happy to be here today with my friend Robert because in a previous episode of codeLive, I did a codeLive about Apex testing and I explained like different approaches, different tricks one of the libraries that I mentioned was Apex Domain Builder. And this is a library that Robert had built. We started a conversation about having a specific codeLive about this topic, and Robert said yes, and he's here with us today. So, Robert, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, Alba. Thanks for having me. I'm really happy to do that with you. I was amazed to hear you talk about one of my oldest open source libraries. It was an important for me, but the world basically ignored it, and I not really understood why. And then I heard that you actually used it, and I was like happy for a week. So yes, here I am. What can I say about myself? I'm in the Salesforce world for help build app exchange packages and other digital transformation projects. But my heart is really with code and packaging and all of that. And yeah, over the time, I actually built some open source things that some people find useful. And I'm happy to talk about that today.
That is great. Thank you so much for that introduction, Robert. I have to say that Robert is a big contributor with the open source community, and you're going to see that today. He's going to show this Apex Domain Builder library to us, and he's going to show to us also a real implementation, like a real example. I want to say hello to some people that I'm seeing in the chat, such as Niket. Thank you so much for joining, Niket. We also have Diefrey Cuadros. I don't know if I'm pronouncing your name correctly. I'm sorry, but hopefully it's something like that. And Robert, Diefrey said that Domain Builder is one of their favorite libraries. So here you
Cool.
have one more fan apart from me. And we also have Hip Hop Dude and that guy who's joining from Switzerland. Okay. So with this, I wanted to start asking you, Robert, if you can tell us a little bit of the history and roots of this library that you built.
Sure. I really have to give credit to some other people in a previous company I worked for. Like my longest gig in the Salesforce ecosystem was at an ISV company called Up2Go. We had a software which was similar to manufacturing cloud for the automotive industry, a huge package like probably like the one you worked on at Financial Force. Many custom objects, hundreds of custom objects which were interrelated. And the more professional we got, the more we struggled with writing good integration tests, not unit tests, but really the full scenario with the full data. And we always were clean coders, or at least trying to do it. And we always had this idea of a good test needs to fit on the screen and be understandable nearly at a glance. And this was impossible because we had more and more of those humongous test setups. It was not about mocking or the actual tests. It was really about the setup of the objects. And right, and maybe if you let me share my screen, I would just show the actual page of the repository and show people what I mean. So let me just.
There you have, and I'm going also to pop up a QR code from which you can go into the GitHub repo of this library that Robert is going to show to us today.
Exactly. So it's boring when I read from screen, but I really want to read what I put here in the about box. The Apex Domain Builder is a framework to set up Apex test data in a highly flexible and readable way using the test data builder pattern. Very complicated words, but this test data builder pattern, it exists for a long time. I didn't invent it, but I stumbled over it, and it's actually here in the README of my thing. I think the builder pattern was even invented by Martin Fowler, and it's talking about how can you construct objects with many variations, where you have a ton of different ways to construct it. That's the builder pattern. And another guy created something called a test data builder. And he basically in this article describes how it's much better than test factories, because instead of having one monolithic class which can create all the variations that you need, you basically have many single simple objects which you can put together like Lego. So to make it the long story short, I just want to read what the domain builder is actually going to overcome. So let me just talk about those reasons which I didn't like in our previous tests when we started this. So I say that Apex integration tests are not easy because you always need to set all the required fields of the objects, even if they are not relevant in tests. You need to insert the objects in the right order. And that's not easy in Salesforce. You sometimes need to have maps to actually keep track of the ideas. Then you need to create relationships by setting lookup fields. And everywhere you have this ugly __ C all over the place. And in the end, you sometimes even run into DML issues because you have too many DML statements whatsoever. And what the domain builder is doing is trying to reduce all that. And the last word before I go into actual code is it's really a framework. It's not a library. A library is something you can nicely sneak into your existing code, but a framework actually forces you to do something. And with the domain builder, you are actually forced to write your tests according to this framework. It's not a big thing because you get a lot of good things, but that's it. So Alba.
Yeah, and my bad because I called it library, but you are
No, all good.
right that you need to write some like classes that represent your domain objects in order to
Exactly.
use it. Correct. Fantastic. So can you show to us some like examples of that?
Sure. I really want to show you real world examples, but I also want to point everybody that the repository and the README actually contains a lot of stuff for you to learn. So even on the README, it says something that for each object which is relevant in your tests, which actually has a custom object, you create such a nice domain builder class. So instead of having all the things in your tests or in a factory, you create such domain builder classes, and you will later see it. And then it tells you how nicely you can actually put them together. Before I talked about Lego, and just look at this from the README. We are creating a contact. We are setting a few properties of a contact, Jack, and last name, first name, and then we're creating an account, adding an opportunity to the account, and even making this contact a contact of this opportunity. And you see, this is basically done in a fluent API way. So, but I just wanted to say that, so you don't need to watch this full video. You everything you need is in the repository. There is a great test class, which basically has a test method which describes all the good features of the domain builder. So let's just take this test. It basically says the good thing with domain builder is that it auto-populates required fields, which are required but irrelevant. And then here you basically see that. Okay. But
so Robert, basically what we are going to have in the end is a much more readable test, because you don't need to worry of setting up like all those required fields that are needed each time that you need to create your account, your contact, or your custom object.
Exactly, because tests are so crucial. Tests. There is this best practice or something which people wish, that a test actually is like good documentation, that you read the test and understand what properties of the application they test. And if you have messy tests where you don't understand what happens, tests don't fulfill that reason anymore. So you're absolutely right. So Alba, if you don't have any questions, I would like to start coding on a real application, on an open source application. Okay?
Yeah, this is great. And I think that it is exactly what our audience is looking for, because this is like what they are going to find, right?
Exactly.
Like a real world example in which they need to implement this pattern, or in which
Exactly.
they are going to want to implement this pattern. So let's start step by step
Sure.
and tell them like which would be the steps to adopt this pattern and how your tests are going to improve.
Cool. As always with sample code, it's complicated. If you make it too simple, people hate it. And if you make it too complex, people forget it. So I took an open source app from Akiva Labs, which I mostly built, and it will be understood by most of the people who watch this, because as you said before, I'm doing open source a lot, and people know that I'm the guy who brought PMD to Salesforce, the magic linter of Apex code. At Akiva Labs, we built something similar with AI, and it's called not PMD, but DMD. It's the document mess detector. And this is an open source library. You don't have to understand this. I just want to show it to you, and maybe you can put it into show notes, Alba. And here is just a short explanation of what DMD is. So PMD has rules which detect ugly code. Rules can be collected into rule sets, and then you run an analysis on code. And DMD is doing the same on business documents. So here is the data model of the DMD app. You see we have a file, which is like a Salesforce attachment, or a file, a binary with a PDF document, and you can run an analysis on it. And when you start such an analysis, you also need to give it a rule set. And a rule set can contain many rules. And to do that, we introduced a linker object, a junction object. It's called rule in set. So those 6 objects are basically the main business objects we want to talk in our tests.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, so let me stop you for a second here,
Sure.
Robert. The reason we are using this app is because we wanted to show you a reasonably complex data model, so that you can see how you would adopt this pattern, the Apex Domain Builder framework, within a project like this one, which is going to be similar to some of the projects that you may have in your orgs. And one more thing, I have also added the QR code into the screen so you can take a look at it.
Exactly.
Right.
Because many people, when I gave examples on Twitter, with like short snippets, they said, okay, this looks easy, but how does that look for more complex things? Okay, let's start with code. And I really want to give the story I gave before. So imagine we just want to write a test where we have such an analysis, and we want to see if it actually produces results. So here you see my test method, and I already called it ugly and bloated and unreadable. So But
I
I'm
love it.
I'm 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 not showing the setup part at the moment, you know. But the exercise, yes, it creates an analysis. You see that we are referencing a file, we are referencing a rule set, then we are inserting the analysis, and then we have a simple assertion. Now I'm going to show you how the setup block of such a test would look if you just do it as you have learned it in the documentation. So this is it. So let me show you. As my test needs to run as a user with a specific permission, I first, and you know, I'm just explaining this. You all should just hear me say, wow, yes, he's right. That is complicated. So I create a standard user of a specific profile. Then I assign it a permission set from my app. Then I say system run as user. Then I create a file. To get the file ID, I need to do something more. Then I create a new rule set. And all the fields which are required actually are in here. Then I create a new rule. Then I create a linker object, a rule in set linker object. And then I have it. And when you look at this, and when you imagine that in a great app, or in a big or normal, recently sized app, you have many tests, you begin to understand that your test class will become really big and messy. And all this setup code is actually covering what you want to do. Okay. Alba?
Let's go ahead.
Let's go ahead. Okay, perfect. Now let's look at the next iteration. And I mostly see people work in this iteration. That's even like a recommendation from Salesforce. Simplify the complexity of your test setup by moving the messiness into a static factory, you know? And this is how it would look like. You know, we just have our static factory, and it would basically have methods which create us a standard user, which create us rules, which create us rule sets with the rule we just created, which creates files, and then we can put it together. That looks really nice. But the problem is, when I see tests like this and look into this test factory, it's really messy. It's really long. And there's like tons of variations. You know, there's create me a user with that, create me a user with that, create me a rule set with one rule, with two rules, with one passing rule. And there is redundancy all over the place. So, you know, and I overdid it a little bit here to just make the point clear. You know, this is how test factories normally look.
Yeah, and also, Robert, let me add there that test factories, because like they are complete responsibility of each of the different developers who are working on the project, it happens that they are always different because one developer
And
writes.
they add stuff which is actually already there, yes.
Exactly. So one developer is writing one test factory and it contains methods that are created in a specific way. And then another developer like follows a slightly different style, and it contains methods which are there, I don't know, to create opportunities, and they are quite similar, but not exactly the same. But with Apex Domain
Yes.
Builder, we're going to have a common language, a common
Exactly.
understanding.
That's a perfect word. You know, the word domain sounds a little bit strange, but I think it comes. I think some people in this webinar will know the book from Eric Evans, Domain-Driven Design, where he says the architecture needs to have like concepts from the world, you know, which actually exist as classes and things like that. So the word domain object is really just, you know, not a technical object, not a persistence object, but a real thing which actually also exists in the world. Yes. So cool. Then let's just move to the class, or no, the method which uses the domain builders. And this is how the original test looks like. You see, we are running S, and there is a class, and I immediately will talk about this ugly underscore for people to understand it. So we basically create a standard user with a document reviewer permission set in one line. Then we create a rule, and we actually initialize it because we later need it. I need the rule reference later for my HTTP mock, because DMD, the app, actually calls to OpenAI. So this is irrelevant, but I want to show people that with domain builder you also can access the objects. When you have a test data factory, it's always a method which returns one thing. But with domain builder, you can basically have multiple references to all the things you can create. You basically can have your reference. So I create a rule, then I create a rule set, and I just say add this rule, and then I call persist. And then in the
Can you
exercise block where I actually want to start the analysis, I just say, yeah, give me a new analysis for this rule set and persist it.
can you
Right,
explain a little bit more what is that persists method
exactly.
doing?
So first, what you have to understand that there is, and I really want to show the folder of the DMD app. There is objects, analysis, result, rule in set, rule set. Each, for the rule underscore C object, we have a rule class which creates this. For the rule set underscore C object, we have a rule set class, which I will show you immediately. So behind all those objects, which in a strange way actually become custom objects in the database, here in my domain folder, you have classes for it. So that's, for example, the rule class. You see, it's not very long. It doesn't have a lot of redundancy and structure. The domain builder class for the rule, for the linker object, is really just 10 lines long. That's the rule set, that's the analysis. Let me first talk about this ugly underscore T, because I get asked a lot. As you know, there in Salesforce, for every standard object like account, there's also a class in Apex. So when you type account A, it's not a class, it's actually the object. So whenever you want to use a standard object like account and opportunity in the domain builder, you actually have to come up with a different naming scheme, okay? So you cannot call it account, because then you would override the internal account object which exists in Salesforce. And that's the reason why I came up with this ugly underscore T, okay?
One question or one comment on that, Robert, is that I think when I used this in the past, we were using, the naming was, for instance, account domain or
Right,
rule domain, whatever, because we were
exactly.
using like the rule class, for instance, was like for the domain class of the Apex Enterprise patterns implementation. So we were using something like that.
I've seen that other people use that, but I personally don't like it. I really want to talk about a rule. I want my boss, my mom, my wife look at this test and really understand it. At the moment I put like domain in there, they are lost. but you're absolutely right. So I really would say the domain builder especially shines with all your custom objects. If you but I really personally don't have a problem with the underscore T. Okay. If you don't mind, I really would look into a domain builder class. Okay?
Yeah, and this is the class that you have to build.
Exactly. For all your objects, you have to build such a class. And those classes are really super simple. They have constructors, and you only need constructors that you are actually, that's the big thing. You build your domain builder classes just with the stuff you actually need. Let's just go back to my test. If there is a field in rule or in rule set which you never need because you don't want to test it, you basically don't care about it. So you don't load your domain builders. I found that many custom objects have a ton of fields which are absolutely irrelevant for any Apex test. And those tests, you don't even need to touch your domain builder. So let's look in here. So I have a constructor which says, with this constructor, you can create a perfect rule, a rule which has everything it needs, which would actually be in the database. And you also see this class needs to extend the domain builder, and the domain builder framework really just contains of a few classes. There is the domain builder, an accompanied test class, and some unit of work classes. So you say my rule extends domain builder, and then you need to create the master constructor, and you just call the super constructor and give it the type of the actual object. That's required. And what I do here, I'm setting properties which I want to have in my rule. It's not only about required properties, but for example, the name of a rule is a required field, but it's often very not important how the name is. So I just make my default constructor set an arbitrary rule name. I also let it set a description. And when you say, hey, but Robert, this is not really setting a field, you're right, but we have methods for that. And this is the second thing you can or have to create in a domain class, property setters. Let's look at this. We have a description field with an ugly _ C, but we create a method for that, which is called description and takes a value. But you could also, maybe you have a totally terrible, I don't know, like a date time field, something which is even hard to set in Apex, and you could make that much nicer here. So with that is not a burden, it's actually really nice for you, because you can make the value which people pass in here much simpler than the value of the actual field. You can put logic in here, you can put some assumptions in here, and you can also rename it. Maybe someone gave this a really ugly field name. You don't have to live with it. Give it a better method name. Yes, that's it. And I just want to show you one more method type in a domain builder. This is the rule set. There is a method to add relationships. A rule set, you want to add a rule to a rule set. So to do this, this is rule set add a rule. And what am I doing? I'm just calling a constructor on the linker object. The linker object, we never actually expose it in the test. We have this domain builder which says, yes, this is of the type rule in set, and then we set the two parents of this object, like every two parents. So we pass in the rule set, we pass in the rule, then there is this set parent method. This is a property of the domain builder, and we set it, and that's all you need. And then here in the add method, we basically delegate all the complexity into this other domain builder class. And while talking, I'm slowing down because I know that whenever I showed this to anyone, they were saying, hey, Robert, this totally confuses me. So Alba,
I think you're explaining it very clearly.
Okay.
And I can totally see like the benefit of having relationships this way, because you can completely forget about having to insert the relationship record, the
Exactly.
junction object record. You just say, I want to add a rule into this rule set. And
Yes,
that's going to be your test data creation. And the junction object thing that's behind the scenes is going to be transparent for you.
exactly. You totally nailed it. Um, I just want to show you one example of such a. Oh, the field name is a little bit complicated. You know, in DMD you can have ChatGPT generate a rule set, and there is a checkbox. You know, it's called AI generate rules, and it can have true and false. But if I don't care about this toggle, I just make the property method AI rules, full stop. You don't need to expose the complexity of the real database in your tests. And I really came to the conclusion that you don't have to. Writing clear tests sometimes means shielding the complexity of the reality away from the reader. Okay, I want to show one last class, one last domain builder before I actually show how all the things belong together. It's about the analysis. The analysis was the complex object which we're actually interested in. The analysis in DMD is where you actually give it a file and a rule set and you run it. And I want to show you that here I have multiple constructors. In many cases, I'm really interested in my test to say, I want to have this file, I want to have this rule set run an analysis. But as you can imagine, sometimes I'm not really interested in the file at all, because sometimes I'm just interested in the rule set, because the file is not of any importance. For these reasons, I also have simpler constructors. I even have a constructor which has no input at all. I can really say new analysis persist, and it will it will insert into the Salesforce org an analysis. And you see, the analysis constructor calls itself with a rule set. So, and when it calls this one, it will also create a default file, and then it will call this constructor. And I know that many people who program in Salesforce, they are not used to this, but constructors should actually call themselves. They should not be independent and redundant. They should actually, one constructor is the constructor that actually does something, and the others are just calling it. And yes, so this is an important concept. And yet now I want to go back to my test, and I want to tell you more magic about the domain builder, because important what makes Apex tests really cluttered is the insertion. You insert stuff, you get the ideas. You don't need to do that. You can really, you see, I say I create a rule set, I add one, and then I can just call persist on any of the domain builders which I called before. I could even put it in here. I could call persist here to even make it simpler. And what that does, and for that I really want to go back to the page where I say something magically. You don't have to care how to insert things. I'm using from Financial Force the unit of work to insert them in a perfect way. But, we're not wasting any DMLs. We're doing it optimal. And then I even implemented like a graph algorithm which will use the Salesforce schema to detect in which order things need to be inserted. So you don't need to care about this. This will be done for you behind the scenes. And yeah.
Let me, Robert, go a step back a little bit, because some people may not know what the unit of work is in Financial Force patterns. Well, so these patterns are called actually Apex Enterprise patterns. And they give you like a few classes and capabilities so that you can implement your Apex code in layers, right? In different layers and separate the concepts. And
Exactly.
one of the tools that they give you, it's called the unit of work. The unit of work is like a table in which you take note of the operations that you want to do. I want to
But you actually do it later, right? It's like a notebook, like one
exactly.
object, another object, and then in the end you say commit, and then it's inserted. But really the listeners, they don't have to understand those concepts. And I also don't want to show off. I just want to say that the domain builder takes away the burden for you to understand when you write a test how the objects are interconnected. This is something which the developers of the domain builder classes do, and for them it's trivial. They actually create the custom objects, so they know perfectly how they fit together. And when you write the tests, you don't need to understand that. And I think that's a good thing, because you write more tests than you actually construct and design custom objects. In the past, the person who writes the test always has to understand the data model perfectly. And now you can basically rip that apart.
Yeah, but I think that the developers that we normally have in codeLive, they really like
Yeah,
knowing how things work behind the scenes. And that's why I'm trying to relate back to how financial force unit of work works, and also to relate back to the first comment that you made at the beginning, saying that this is super efficient because you are saving DML
yes,
operations. And that is correct, because instead of doing like first I insert the rule, then I insert the rule set, then I am inserting the analysis records, like everything is done at the same time in a single DML operation.
exactly. And really, the domain builder library makes tests much faster because simply of that. Our problems in the past, when at Up2Go we invented this concept and this library, we really also we not only struggled with very complex and hard to read tests, but we also struggled with slow tests. And the slowness came from those multiple inserts. And we even had queries internally. And by moving this complexity into unit of work and having this graph algorithm which finds out the dependencies, the tests ran much faster. I'm sure there is many people who love to mock out there. There is great mocking libraries. You will never get the speed of pure in-memory tests, but really back then we were at a company where we didn't want to mock. We really had to test all the triggers, all the validation rules, and all of that. And I believe there's many people in Salesforce who actually want that.
I think also, well, I think the combination of both techniques is the
Yes,
power, right?
absolutely.
Because if you are writing like unit tests, like strict unit tests, then mocking is super helpful. But
Mocking is
for
super, yes,
integration tests, you need to use like real data. So
true. Yeah, right. The right tool for the job at hand. I just opened a different test, which because people should see different ones. There is another feature in D&D that you can basically export a rule set to a file so that you can bring it from one org to the other. And this is just such a test which shows that you can actually export a single rule set. And the setup is really super simple. Um, we say we create a rule set, we give it a name because later in the asserts we actually care about the name, and then we add two rules. And this is maybe this is an explanation for everybody who knows me, that I always struggled with prettier as a formatter. I really learned to rely on this way of formatting. I think it really makes it very easy to read when you indent it like this, like I do it, all the properties here and then an empty line, but with prettier, it gets a little bit messy. So yeah, good. So yeah, you see it. Here I'm just calling persist on the object. Here I'm just adding the rules because I'm not really interested in the reference to the rules. I also want to say that, this rule set object, which is created here, it's not an S object, but there is stuff in there. If you want the S object, you could, for example, do this, then you would get the S object. Or if you want the ID, you can just do this. If you want the ID, as I do here, you are not actually getting the ID of the custom object, but the domain builder covers that for you. So in most cases, those domain builder objects will nearly behave as the S object. Okay, so Alba, what do you think?
Regarding what?
Regarding the time, should we show more? Do you want to ask questions?
So I think we can maybe talk a little bit about the limitations that you've seen in the framework.
Yeah. Cool. Yes. Limitation-wise, there is not many limitations, technical ones. There is one technical limitation which exists with the unit of work, and it means you cannot really insert circular things. It's perfectly possible in Salesforce that objects basically reference each other. Like one object is using the other as a parent, and the parent is linking to one child. You cannot insert this with the domain builder. You can do something. I just want to show you something from the standard tests. How is it called? Yes, self-references are possible. So do you see that? If you have a contact which is your boss, and then another contact should link the boss, that's possible. So you can have contact linking contact, but you cannot have the boss reference itself. That's not possible.
Mm-hmm.
If you would need that, you would need to build something like manually. You could perfectly use the domain builder, but you could not cover that directly with the domain builder. You would have to insert that or update the record later.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, there is. Sorry, Alba.
No, go ahead.
Yeah. Another restriction is, which is not a problem for me and not for anyone I work with, but I know people struggle with it. When you want to use it for standard objects, you have to invent a naming scheme like this _t or something. I also found that there are some use cases in tests where you need to create either a lot of objects or you want to randomize the setting of the features. I know there is many good libraries where you can say, create me 100 accounts. And those libraries basically find out which fields this has and generate random values for that, which is really cool. I tried to marry that with the domain builder, but I found it really hard. So if you need tests where you create large amounts of objects, or where you basically want to populate previously unknown fields because you live in an org where new custom fields are added very often, then the domain builder might not be the right thing. I would say the domain builder is perfect for AppExchange work, where a dedicated team works on a package where the objects are really owned by a team. Yeah.
And I would agree with that because I've used it in that context, and I think it was like very useful. I think, Robert, that luckily you have great documentation here, and the audience can like go to the repo and take a look at all the examples, because you have examples for almost all the different use cases. And I think, yes, it has limitations, but the limitations are just a few. So I think it's worth to take a look at it and to play
Yeah.
with it.
And
I
I
would.
can maybe just to add something to that.
Mhm.
Um, I used the domain builder mostly in every single project I did, be it like commercial or not commercial, be it open source, across multiple companies. And I only found a few places where I thought it's not worth using it. You know, sometimes the tests are so simple because the tests really just need an account object. Then maybe you just don't want to add the library, because as you see in the library, there is a reference to a few of those open source MIT licensed financial force library objects. But yeah, if you don't want that, you probably should not do it. But the moment you have like 10 custom objects and they are related with each other, it's really worth using it.
It's really helpful. Yeah, I agree. I completely agree. So, Robert, to finish, we're going to take a look at some questions that were on the chat. I want to tell all the people who are watching the stream, if you have any more questions, put them in the chat because we are going to read them now. So, there was a question from Rohit Kumar, which is, and I know the response to this. The question is, why are you using the system class, system.assert class for sessions? Because Salesforce has a new class and you are not using it, Robert. Very bad.
Yeah, that's true. It's not because I don't know about this. It's just because I'm not totally convinced that it's so much better.
Or
I really
probably,
do not use it in most projects. The assert class is really cool when you want to assert many other things, but yeah, I don't have to adopt every new feature from Salesforce.
yeah, I personally think it's better, but I know that this repo was created, I think, 6 years ago, something like
Oh
that.
yeah, yeah. But
So, by that time, the Apex class, the assert class didn't exist, and obviously, it's like some effort to update it.
yeah, exactly.
Okay, yeah, and there is one more question. This question is about PMD actually, and we're going to take advantage that you are here to ask you this question. And they are asking about the difference between PMD and Code Analyzer. Apex Code Analyzer,
That's a great question
Salesforce Code
because
Analyzer.
they
Sorry.
are like a good couple. They belong together.
Mm.
So
Indeed, Code Analyzer uses PMD. Correct.
exactly. So now, yeah, let me explain you this. You know, when I ported PMD to Salesforce, it was the only tool that you use, and then Salesforce actually worked together with me and with the PMD community to improve PMD. You know, PMD cannot do some things which other commercial tools like Clayton or CodeScan can do. And Salesforce made a really smart move. They said, we're not reinventing the wheel. They just added something, for example, the graph engine. And then they built the code analyzer as an umbrella technology, which works in the command line and basically calls PMD or the graph engine or ESLint whenever you scan code of that type. And by doing that, Salesforce really has a super flexible framework for scanning arbitrary types of Salesforce code. So I really would say if you just lint your stuff in the IDE, you can perfectly use PMD. But the moment you think of a DevOps pipeline where you want to use PMD for scanning Apex and metadata, where you want to scan JavaScript and Lightning Web Component, you should use the code scanner for that. It's much better, and it's even mandatory now for App Exchange partners. When we go into security review, we actually have to use the code scanner, which under the hood will use PMD. So they are really go together like love.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much for that, Robert. I've also popped up a QR code in case that you want to take a look at Code Analyzer. And yeah, and also I wanted to add that Salesforce is investing in Code Analyzer, in integrating it with other tools that we have with Einstein for developers, with Apex Guru. So it's really interesting, and you should all take a look if you don't know it.
And Salesforce is investing in PMD, which Salesforce helped with PMD many years ago when I started, but now as it is such an integral part of the code analyzer, Salesforce is really committed to actually contributing to open source. The Apex parser just recently got open source, and Salesforce really will improve this parser whenever Apex gets new features. And you know that Apex gets new features every release. So I'm super happy about that.
Yeah. I'm happy too about that. Yeah, Rohit is saying that Code Analyzer has also a good user interface to visualize like the graphs and so on. So yeah. Okay. So I think, Robert, that we are going to stop here. I want to thank you because it's been so special to do this codeLive with you. I think you explain things so well, and I think that the audience will have very clear in mind what this framework is for and why it can be useful for them. I'm going to pop up one last QR code, which is your LinkedIn, in case
Exactly.
that people
Or my
have.
X, my Twitter. People can even use the issues tab on the repository. If something doesn't work for you or you want an extension, just create an issue. I try to respond friendly and fast. Just tell me how you made it work or not made it work, and I will try to help you.
Yeah. So yeah, Rohit was asking Code Analyzer uses PMD. Yes, it uses PMD. That's why Robert was saying there is love between the PMD and Salesforce Code Analyzer. Yeah. Okay, so again, Robert, thank you so much. Thank you so much for the audience. Tech Lead Consulting, Sumant, Rohit, that guy, Hip Hop Dude, Niket, Defray, everyone on the chat who participated on the chat today. I owe you a codeLive about mocks, about mocking, and that will happen. I don't know exactly when, but in a few weeks, because I decided to have this one first, and but that doesn't mean that I have forgotten. Thank you so much, Robert, and see you soon.
Bye-bye. Thanks for having me.
Bye.